Political commentator Dr. Bryce Edwards joins me now. Bryce, kia ora. Good morning.
Morena, Andrew.
Now, looking back at the year, and what I asked you to do for this week is the top five most interesting political stories of the year. And we may get to this in more detail later on, but what's fascinating for me is this involves the minor parties, not the major players. National and Labour don't get a look in.
That's right. This has been the year of the minor parties. Greens, Te Pāti Māori Act have really been the colour in a year that has been quite colourful. But we've had a new government doing lots of serious things and an opposition regrouping. But no, it's the minor parties that really have pushed the envelope, and not necessarily all in a positive way. There's been a few scandals.
Exactly.
So
I'm sure Greens would prefer not to be leading this list in the headlines for all of the wrong reasons. I mean, hey, is any publicity good publicity? I can't see how this works for them, honestly.
No, look, going from 5 to 1, of the top five stories, I think, of the year, at number five, it has to be Golriz Ghahraman. She has to be in there. The Greens have had a terrible year of all those minor parties. They've had the big scandals. They're still holding up in the polls, but I think they've been tarnished quite a bit. And there's big questions around, what they stand for. And so when you've got Golriz Ghahraman, who was one of their senior MPs, their spokesperson on justice issues, this time last year she was starting to get in trouble over alleged shoplifting, which turned out to be she's prosecuted, convicted
Yep.
on that, and she resigned from Parliament. And that was just a major tarnishing for the Greens. That they didn't need that at all.
Shoplifting from high-end stores and not a one-off incident. It seemed to be a bit of a lifestyle issue there. Rough start for the Greens. In at number four, Darlene Tana didn't help either.
Oh, it just continued for a terrible year for the Greens. And so Darlene Tana, one of their new MPs, again in trouble for potentially legal issues with the way that her family business was being run. The Greens, launched that investigation, a private investigation into that. It dragged on for months and months and months. And in all that time, they didn't manage to kind of juggle that issue very well,
Yep.
and so they had a bit of a bust up with their own MP, and it led to them kicking Darlene Tana out of Parliament. And they were the first party to use this new party hopping, waka jumping bill,
Yep.
and this was a bill that the Greens had previously been strongly opposed to, but they were the ones that used it themselves. So again, I think it was a big issue of principle and direction for the Greens, and really showed that, I don't know, they've got a lot of thinking to do over
Yep.
summer about, how do we become an environmental party again, with quality candidates
Mm.
and people that the public can trust.
When you've got more than one issue in the same category, when you've got one player that's performing badly, maybe it's their fault. When you've got
Yeah.
several people, you blame the coach. Of course, Chloe Swarbrick has come in as the new co-leader, a rising star in politics. But does some of this fall back on her and her leadership style, do you think, Bryce?
Well, both those issues arose under her predecessors, so she can
Okay.
pass the buck a bit. But and Chloe Swarbrick is someone that I really rate as a very impressive politician, very impressive leader. But she has underwhelmed me in the way that she handled those issues this year, and generally she hasn't really had the she hasn't risen in the way that I thought she might be. I thought we might end up with her being the preferred prime minister for
Yep.
the
Yep.
nation at the end of the year. But no, I think she's been quite underwhelming.
Not just the Greens in trouble, to be fair. Casey
No,
Costello, where there's smoke, there's fire, some people have been saying. Now, no proof on this one, but her
exactly.
policies to do with smoking cessation and a lot of the bills, of course, that Labour brought in were cut. One of the first things she did under her remit, taking a lot of flack for this.
Yes, so Casey Costello, the New Zealand First Minister in the government. Um, I mean, this wasn't as big a story as those previous two I talked about, but I think for a lot of people, it raised questions about the government and whether they were, making decisions for vested interests. And so there were some connections, and there still are, between her party, New Zealand First, and tobacco lobbyists. Yeah, like you say, there was smoke, but not necessarily any smoking gun. But there was a lot of rollbacks by this government, and that was one that people thought, well, why are they doing this?
Yeah.
Why are they? And so it ended up being very unpopular, I think, for the government, those smoking reforms or rollbacks of reforms.
Hmm.
And I think she's ended up in a very weak position by the end of the year. I noticed, I think it was one major political editor rated her as zero point 0.5 out of 10
Wow.
as a cabinet minister. So, yeah, not one of the highest performing cabinet ministers, the lowest.
Again, somebody with not a lot of experience in this space, certainly not to one of the most experienced politicians, even within the New Zealand First camp, who, of course, are back in after a time in the wilderness. Should senior leadership within New Zealand First take more responsibility here rather than go, no, look, this is all Casey's fault?
Well, I think they did defend her.
Okay.
So Winston Peters and Shane Jones did defend her. There's only so much that could be said, though.
Yeah.
I mean, she had dug her own hole in many ways. She had lots of things she couldn't really explain about in particular, she had put forward some briefing to her advisors that included ideas that nicotine was only as harmful as caffeine and all these sort of things that she couldn't really explain where she'd got that information from. Her leaders tried to defend her, but no, I think this was on her.
And not the only controversy, I suppose, as well. Within her own department, it was found that one of her staff members, at least, was indirectly related to another politician. This was again no proof of any misdeeds, but not necessarily a good look.
Yeah, conflicts of interest all over the show. These ones arguably were against Casey Costello.
Yep.
So yes, it was one of the advisors in the Ministry of Health was related to a front bench Labor, the health spokesperson, in
Yeah.
fact. So, and Casey Costello, the minister, hadn't been informed of that. So yeah, there's lots of questions on all sides of politics, I think, about integrity.
It's still with New Zealand First, although to be fair, this does involve National as with a coalition lead, as it were, a triumvirate of ministers to rule them all. The fast track bill now. People are in favour of moving forward with infrastructure, but not at any cost. The fast track bill certainly caused a bit of a storm.
Yes, the bill passed yesterday, so it became an act, had its first reading, and I think it was really the most substantial reform of this government this year. And it's one that's kind of polarizing, and you either love it or hate it because it's going to enable a lot more development. And so the government's, they're saying, well, let's just get things done. We had 6 years of a government just not building hospitals, roads, and everything that needs to be done. We're just going to create a mechanism to get through the red tape and get things built. And so that's how it's being sold. And I think that resonates with a lot of people. And then, of course, there's the critics, myself included, that say, well, sometimes you need a bit of red tape and sometimes you need to have processes to stop vested interests and the wealthy being able to just buy the permissions to do whatever you want, which is what some of us fear will happen under this. But yeah, I think it's one of the bigger accomplishments of the governments, but also one of the bigger dangers going forward.
And now, if particularly concerns from an environmental point of view, and there were some obvious red or green flags depending on, that politically, anyway. And honestly, this would have been an easy thing for the Greens to push back against. This would have been an easy thing for them to make political capital out of if they weren't so busy doing their own firefighting. I suppose.
I agree with that actually. And the Greens and Labour earlier in the year did push quite hard on against the fast track bill, but in the end, I think they ended up a lot more focused on. Sorry, I've got some cats fighting in the
Oh
background
dear.
here. Hey. But I was going to say that Labour and the Greens ended up concentrating a lot more on what I think was the biggest political story of the year,
Yeah.
and that's the Treaty Principles Bill.
And
So
perhaps fighting
party,
cats is a wonderful metaphor for that one, and
uh,
it certainly is the story which dominated. And look, it's I suppose the most recent one, but it also, I mean, huge response from the public
yeah,
with the hikoi and various polls out on this one. It's a big story to be taking into the summer holidays with Waitangi on the horizon.
oh, look, this is going to dominate 2025 as well. We've got the select committee hearings going on for the next 6 months. Everyone will get to have their say. It will be, yes, colourful, shall we say.
Yeah.
It means that Waitangi and the Ratana celebrations are going to be dominated by this discussion. And clearly, as we've seen over the last few months, there'll be two clear beneficiaries from this debate. Te Pāti Māori on one side, ACT and David Seymour on the other.
Yep.
And, they're putting forward some pretty strong arguments, I think they are convincing a lot of people, but we're ending up with quite a polarized sort of outcome from that. So let's hope that, in 2025, we can continue debating it, but, not sort of give up on trying to understand the other side
Yep.
and not end up in our own echo chambers where we see the other side as being sort of evil or idiotic or whatever.
Yep.
We sort of need to understand both sides.
And of course, as we look towards 2025, as I mentioned at the beginning, the major parties missing in action when it comes to this top stories. But the middle year of a 3-year term, of course, this will be the year of delivery. This is the year which, I mean, National said himself, 7 impossible things to do before breakfast. Well, perhaps more than that. Certainly it's going to be, well, it's going to need to be a big year for National with the agenda that they have set for themselves. Bryce, just want to say thank you for all that you've done. Thank you for all that you've brought to the show throughout 2024. Hope you have a restful and relaxing Christmas and summer break. Kia ora, thanks for joining us.
Thanks, Andrew, and you too. And I look forward to chatting in January.
Hey, thanks very much for joining us in the Rhema studio. Thanks very much for watching the interview. It's kind of nice to have an audience, actually. And if you did like what you watched, then do give us a like, do give us the thumbs up. And if you'd like to see more interviews like that one, or perhaps even better, subscribe and those interviews will come straight to you. Don't forget to turn on your notifications, and we'll see you in the next one. Cheers.